They were draped in crimson robes. The battle was a heated one, and with their hoodies flung off, he was finally able to see their faces. What was most eye-catching about them was their snow-white hair, white as freshly fallen snow, just like his. But their eyes were crimson, and they brandished claws at the archguards, each strike unleashing powerful blood-red energy. When paired with their peculiar appearance, their extended ears and bared fangs, Ryuk could have easily labeled them as vampires, if not for the eye-catching black scales covering the lower parts of their faces and parts of their palms. These scales were inscribed with runic, red blood symbols. Many of the 12 were men, with only 2 being female, but 7 of them had already been defeated, collapsing into their own pool of blood, and only 3 were still fighting. Ryuk didn't bother to engage since the group seemed to have everything under control already. Instead, he looked around, eyes flickering in nauseous surprise at what lay before him. For one, they had previously been hidden behind a mountain. Unlike the others, this mountain wasn't entirely broken, and behind it was a blood-red runic circle. It was large, around 20 meters in circumference. But what caught his attention was the bizarre red blood that flowed across the runes carved into it. Ryuk walked closer, dragging a hand across the surface before raising it to his nose. A single sniff was all he needed.
Boat.
He looked around further, but found nothing else. Just the runic circle. It can't just be that. Where did those things get the blood from? He had seen some of their blood spilled on the ground during the battle, and he could tell it wasn't the same as what was used on the circle. So he turned to the one thing that still felt like a remaining clue. The mountain where they'd all hidden behind. The sound that brought me here. The sound of something knocking. Like the sound of carving? He muttered to himself, eyes scanning the dark mountain. Footsteps echoed behind him, and he could already sense the group's presence, though he didn't turn. Instead, he moved closer to the mountain wall, pressing an ear against the cold rock and silently listening. Could barely be heard. The sound of something dripping against stone. Even with his incredible sense of hearing, the sound was distant, faint. He continued moving quietly along the mountain's side and was quick to realize. The farther he went, the clearer the sound became. Just what is he even doing? Was the thought lingering in the minds of the group behind him. They had already sent all their divine senses through the mountain, scanning it in its entirety, and found nothing. It was just a regular old mountain, looking special for not being broken. Or so they thought. Until Ryuk floated a couple of meters into the air, his ear pressed against the stone. He began tapping randomly along the surface. It hadn't even been 10 seconds before he felt it. A wall looser than the rest. He pushed in. The mountain began shaking violently, and Ryuk backed off it. It didn't seem like it would all come slamming down, but better safe than sorry. Dust and small stones fell, and like a puzzle unraveling, block after block began to sink into the mountain itself. The process continued, a grumbling roar echoing as chunks receded inward. When it ended, the group instinctively wrinkled their noses. The smell was disgusting. Not just the stench of blood, but of rot. And it was unmistakably that of rotting bodies, as Ryuk looked on at the scene now revealed. A hall was built into the mountain. At the center of the hall stood a simple altar, covered in bizarre red runes. Nothing about the altar seemed unusual until one looked around it. Half-rotten bodies, their blood clearly drained, their faces still frozen in anguish, even in death. But even in death, Ryuk could sense it. The missing archguards, Mason's voice echoed, the group now having arrived beside him in the air. They are a total of 81, Grozg added, floating closer to the bodies and counting again. The organization had said 77 people were missing, but here there were 81. And they're all dead, Gus muttered, his heart sinking at the sight. Foreigner archguards were rare enough, considering the requirement to be at the Apocrypha stage, a rare, elite tier of cultivation even in the upper realms. Yet here, 81 were right before them. The way their souls seemed sucked out, and their blood dried, Ryuk thought, stepping further into the mountain. His eyes roamed, settling on the altar and the red runes covering its edges. "Did you leave any of the crimson demons alive?" he asked, turning to the group. They shook their heads. "They all killed themselves once they realized defeat was inevitable," Mason explained. Ryuk hummed to himself. There wasn't much left. Just the altar, the dead bodies, and the incomplete runes on the ground. Perhaps if they had managed to keep even one of the crimson demons alive, they might have uncovered more. But unfortunately, they were all dead. Orlith stepped forward. Her golden hand extended, touching the altar's surface. As she did, the blood-red lines flared, releasing a shocking, overwhelming force that tried to suck her blood. But in the end, it failed. Then, cracks began forming all over the altar's surface before it shattered into nothing, dispersing into fragments. But as it disappeared, something strange formed. A shape, lingering in the air for just a few seconds before vanishing completely. Something Ryuk saw only once, but burned into his memory forever. Wordlessly, he turned, the runic image he last saw still burnt into his memory, before looking at the one present on the ground behind the mountain. A gleam of realization crossed his eyes right after. "I think I get it now. It's a ritual." Grozg's voice rang out through the space. "This is a ritual ground. The altar itself is the clearest proof of that. These foreigner archguards died due to having their blood sucked out. That's the power of the runes present in that altar. It sucked their blood, transferring it to wherever this portal is," he explained. But Orlith shook her head. "No, it didn't suck their blood. It sucked away their energy, blood energy to be exact. When I placed my hand on it, it tried to suck mine. But my divine concentration was beyond it, and therefore, it shattered into pieces. When blood energy is completely sucked away, the blood itself refuses to exist," she explained, as Ryuk, standing behind them, narrowed his eyes in thought. So the altar was sucking the energy of the archguards and transferring it to an altar located in a different area? He muttered silently to himself. What happens to this energy? Is it being harnessed by someone? Or is it being used by something? Just what is it being used for? Why target only the foreigner archguards instead of the true archguards or any other fallen angel or race? Just who is behind all this? What is their purpose? The questions stirred questions after questions into Ryuk, whose brows creased sharply. Everything he'd ever been involved in before, he always had a clear head, and just enough information to justify what he was doing. But this time he felt lost. Our mission was to find the missing archguards. Grozg's voice echoed through, silencing their thoughts. Which we have. We take them back to base and report, he said in a finalized tone. The Crimson Demons are an occultic race. What's going on here is most likely one of their bizarre awakening rituals. Awakening ritual? Ryuk repeated in his head, introduced to a term he'd never heard before. But whatever it is, it's none of our business. If the base wants to find out more, they'll post a new loyalty quest for it. For now, our mission is complete, Grozg concluded. But just then, it flashed before Ryuk's eyes. Secret mission. Find the archguards. Completed. Reward? New mission. Find the reason for the missing archguards. Time limit to begin. 5 hours. The system notification flickered as Ryuk's eyes widened and his brows tightened further. A new mission? And it has a time limit? This is the first time that's happened. While the others were busy packing up the corpses, stuffing them into storage bags, Ryuk and Orlith were the only two who stood idle. And unlike Ryuk, busy fidgeting with the system panel and lost in his thoughts. She was well conscious and could see his creased brows as he stared blankly at the ground. Is something the problem? Her voice echoed beside him, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned slightly, meeting her unblinking golden eyes, which seemed to stare right into his soul. She knew something was off, but Ryuk couldn't mention the system's mission. Instead, I think, he started, pausing with reluctance in his tone. The hesitation only intrigued her further. You think what? She asked, I think I can, he said, pausing again before stepping forward, descending from the mountain ridge, and landing on the runic circle drawn into the ground. Now, the strange, incomplete circle beneath him looked so much more familiar after her actions. It was the same image he'd seen flash into his mind right before Orlith shattered the altar into fragments. Without wasting another second, Ryuk's hand morphed into a claw, folding tightly into his palm until blood began to drip. Orlith slowly descended as she observed him in silence. At first, she was amused for his blood wasn't red or golden. It was white, milky white. That alone was unusual, as she'd never seen a race with white blood before. But it didn't stop there. Ryuk moved toward the incomplete runes and began to spill his blood onto them. He wasn't just dumping it. He traced it, pausing at certain points, then continuing again, carefully and deliberately, like a ritual of his own. By the time the group finished storing the bodies, Ryuk was still at it. What is he doing this time? Grozk muttered tiredly as he descended from the mountain ridge and stepped forward towards him, only to be blocked by Orlith, who spread her hands, stopping him in his tracks. Let him continue, she said calmly. With Orlith holding them back, Ryuk got his chance. He tried to draw the image as he had seen it in his memory. It was hard. The more he drew, the more the image seemed to blur in his mind. But he pushed through, sweat pouring down his temple. And finally, when the last stroke was done, a bizarre red ripple surged beneath their feet, shaking the entire ground like an earthquake. Ryuk stepped back as the runic circle lit up brilliantly. The tremors didn't stop, only worsened with each second. Then suddenly, something began to emerge from the runes. It rose slowly, grandly, into the air, at a height of 10 meters before stopping. A grand door, built from ancient black stones, streaked with crimson runes all over its surface. There was no aura coming from it. It looked like an ordinary door. But Ryuk glanced beneath his feet. Spiderweb cracks spread out beneath him. The gravity had just increased by thousands of times. Moments after its appearance, the door began opening, its frame swinging slowly backward into itself. And within it was a revolving vortex of deep crimson spun quietly, ominously, silently revolving and waiting. It was clear to Ryuk. This was the answer to the quest he had been given by the system. But he didn't jump in immediately. He turned toward the group, who all stood in stunned silence. Especially Orlith, whose brows were now slightly creased. I think I can open the door to wherever the energy is being sent, he finally completed. As he spoke, Orlith took a silent step forward toward the door. But the sound of a shoulder being grabbed rang out through the space, causing Orlith to halt in her steps. But it wasn't just her, everyone in the group stopped. Oh, Ryuk thought. Standing at the front, he could clearly see Orlith's expression. Her face, normally expressionless, even only slightly creasing from all that had happened before, had now turned into one of surprise as she slowly turned her head to look behind her. Her eyes met Grozk's, which held firm for a moment, but then she shifted her gaze downward to his hand, resting on her shoulder. It was as if Grozk had been electrocuted as he immediately withdrew his hand. She turned fully to him, her brows furrowed in visible annoyance. I'm sorry about that, he said awkwardly. But all he received was her cold, blank stare. A stare he couldn't help but notice was colder than ever before. Are you planning on going through the door? Grozk asked. And if I am? Orlith replied flatly. You can't. He shot back, leading to her raising an eyebrow. The Crimson Demons are an occultic race that excels in awakening rituals. That door behind you is where they sent the energy. Most likely, to one of the beings they want to awaken. I've heard of some of the entities the Crimson Demons have awakened in the past. Some were cosmic-level disasters. If it took the blood energy of 81 Apocrypha Stage Archguards just to open the eyelid of whatever's behind that door, then that thing isn't something you can handle alone. Even if you think we stopped its true awakening, that guy behind you is a foreigner Archguard. His blood energy might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back. You'll only get yourself hurt, he warned, voice loud. But her cold, blank stare didn't change, and he sighed helplessly, regaining control of himself. He inhaled slightly, reining in his chaotic motions before he spoke once more, this time softer. Going through that door wasn't part of the quest, Orlith. We need to return to base, report what we found, and regroup properly before facing whatever that is. The next mission will have its own rewards, probably even better than this one, and then it'll be worth it. To go blindly into such an unknown is suicide. Do you understand, Orlith? Grosk repeated, but the answer he got was Orlith stepping forward, toward him closer and closer until they were just a few inches apart. She was so close now, he could even smell her scent, and he watched her tilt her head up to look at him and whispering, "Are you afraid I would get hurt, Grosk?" She said it so gently that it left him bewildered. Orlith had never asked questions like that, and never came so close to someone before. But now she was asking him, was he scared of her getting hurt? I am, he admitted with a sigh. Then she leaned in closer, her voice low but resolute. "I won't turn away," she said, firm and determined, and Grosk's heart sank. "But if you're truly worried about me, then why not come with me to make sure I'm safe? So your worried heart can rest, knowing I'm not alone. Venture into the unknown with me, and we'll face whatever is in there, together." She reached out, slowly trying to grab his hand, her gaze never leaving his. What kind of man refuses a call like that from his own crush? The system notification flashed, seemingly amused. But Ryuk's expression was dead serious as he replied in his mind, "Grosk." "Ha!" Just a couple of inches before Orlith's fingers could touch Grosk's hand. The group watched in stunned silence as Grosk faintly pulled back. It escaped the lips of both Mason and Gus, who stood wide-eyed, mouths agape. He refused? He refused. Even the system screamed internally along with them, and Ryuk's eyes dropped low. Grosk only seemed to realize what he had done once his withdrawn hand returned to his side. He tried to make amends, quickly reaching forward and grabbing her hand. "We'll come back to the portal later," he said, trying to explain. "But it's better to let the base know and start a full-scale research into what could be hiding behind that door. Going in like this, risking our lives for nothing, isn't smart." He tried to convince her, but Orlith yanked her hand away, turning her back on him as she resumed walking toward Ryuk, who silently stepped to the side. Before she entered the gate, she paused, without turning her head, and spoke coldly. "I do not fancy men who hide their cowardice behind a veil of logicality." Her words rang out, echoing through the space and shaking the atmosphere. "You've lost your only chance of earning my pleasing eyes, Grosk, and I, Orlith Dragner, never give second chances," she declared bluntly, each word like a dagger through Grosk's chest. He staggered back, like someone who had just been shoved, his eyes wide in disbelief. Why? He could barely mutter. Then, Orlith stretched out her hand to the side, and Ryuk watched as the golden worm reappeared, spitting out the ship it had previously swallowed. "You all take the ship back. Return to base with Grosk. If you never see me again, you can split the reward amongst yourselves." She turned and continued toward the revolving golden portal. The sound of clenched teeth rang out from Grosk, whose eyes lit with fiery rage. He had just been rejected so brutally by the one person he had always shown honor and respect. He had courted many women in his life, and not for once had he ever failed to get what he wanted, talkless of being publicly embarrassed like he had been now. His eyes drifted to the side, and then they locked onto the boy standing silently behind her. "This is because of him, isn't it?" he suddenly spat out. Not only did Mason and Gus's eyes widen, but even Ryuk's expression slightly shifted in surprise, and the words were enough to make Orlith pause in her steps. "Hey Grosk, let it go," Mason said, grabbing Grosk's shoulder to pull him back, but Grosk yanked away. "Ever since that boy appeared, you've changed. You defended him, even when it was clear he was useless. You chased after him when he started running forward, and you stopped me from interfering when he was opening up that godforsaken gate. You've always been lusting after him. Grozg, that's enough, Mason shouted, forcefully exerting strength and pulling Grozg back. But the man only laughed even more evilly. Who would have thought? Grozg barked, his voice bitter. The so-called noble Oralith Dragner, falling for a low-blood, feminine-looking kid who barely looks a day past puberty. He gave a dry, bitter laugh. Pathetic you are, Oralith. What the hell? I was just standing here, breathing. What's this got to do with me? Feminine-looking kid, looking barely a day past puberty. Ha ha ha. That's a good one. The system mocked as a vein ripened out of Ryuk's forehead. Hey, you piece of a bitch. He was about to curse out when the cold words rang out once more. You've touched me twice now, Oralith said, as the group paused, watching her hair slowly begin rising against gravity, dots of golden light trailing around her figure. Her actions were minimal, but the incredible aura that followed was as if a god had descended upon them. The group's face changed massively, as even Mason and Gus slowly retreated backwards, a step at a time. Oralith turned, face masked in an absolute cold expression, and she uttered a sentence that resonated within Grozg's soul. When next you touch me, I'll be cleaving off your head. It wasn't a threat. No, far from it. As Grozg's hands unconsciously reached for his throat, both of his knees collapsing all in a second. Ah! He breathed like one who had just been spared by a death from the guillotine, an action that surprised Ryuk. But before more could be said, Oralith continued into the portal, disappearing within. The gate began wavering right after, trying to close behind her, and Ryuk immediately followed within, the gate slamming shut with a loud bang before it slowly began withdrawing back into the ground. The duo, Mason and Gus, who stood away, watched the scene, their eyebrows furrowed in unease. True to her words, Oralith had left, and the young foreigner Archguard had followed her within. It was an unwise move, but it was true to the Oralith they knew. Angels from the Dragner family were the incarnation of firm and unyielding. If they decided on something, then only death could stop them. After her disappearance, Grozg finally felt the pressure fade, but the memories were still fresh in his head. When she had spoken of cleaving his head, he had seen it. A scene of his head being instantly cleaved off, and the horror and helplessness had been enough to make him collapse to his knees. She's a monster. A monster. Even though she was only a stage above him in cultivation. The power in her words wasn't something he could currently bear. But when he turned to look at the gate withdrawing into the runes, a cold, wicked smile appeared on his lips. An awakening ritual on nihility? The only one it could possibly try to awaken is that of an ancient nihility, and that gate will lead right to that entity. Both of them are as good as dead, he thought, the anger and rage he felt slowly receding. What use was bearing a grudge against someone already dead? With that, he simply turned to look at the ship she had left behind. Let's leave, he said curtly to Mason and Gus, who stared at the dimming runes on the floor one last time before scurrying after him. Soon, the trio were on board the ship, leaving the desolate world behind, along with two of their group. It was a familiar sensation, one he had felt so many times that it had almost become natural. The sensation of falling through a wormhole. His eyes were wide open, but he saw nothing. His ears twitched, but there was no sound, not even the one of him moving through the void. But eventually the world began to clear up. It was like the ending of a tunnel beneath, and he fell into it. The sudden rays were more than blinding, and then he slammed into the ground, blasting a humanoid-shaped hole into the oddly soft surface. The world spun around for a couple of moments before finally coming to a stop. He saw the sun shining right above his face, and when he took a breath of the air, he exhaled in relief. Unlike the putrid smell of nihility, this air was so fresh, it reminded him of Endearth. His hands reached upwards, grabbing the edge of the ground and pulling himself out. "Now where am I?" he muttered thoughtfully, eyes scanning across the scene around him. For one, he was in quite a peculiar place. Before him was an unending expanse of blue sea. Unending because Ryuk couldn't see the end. The sound of waves lapping against the shore could be heard so clearly. The feeling made his caution begin to fade into thin air. He turned away from the sea to look behind, and there was an island. An island of various trees, spanning high into the air. Right now, Ryuk was standing on the periphery between the island and the sea. Honestly, it wasn't a bad place at all. It was the perfect place for someone seeking a vacation. But then, his eyes suddenly furrowed. No, this doesn't feel right. There were rituals, dead bodies, and blood energy being drained, and the source of all that is a peaceful sea island. Ryuk muttered in faint disbelief, but he was quick to realize another truth. Something is weird. He stared beneath him, looking at his feet, and after silently staring at them for 30 seconds, Ryuk's eyes flashed in disbelief. No way, he thought, exerting strength beneath his feet and jumping into the air. He didn't jump very high at all, only about 100 meters into the air, and when he tried to hold the surrounding space onto himself, bang! His legs slammed back into the sand as he collapsed onto his butt. What the? Immediately, Ryuk rose, exerting even more strength and jumping high into the air again. Even with the increased strength, he still only reached 100 meters before violently being drawn back down. He collapsed onto his butt once more. He tried one more time. What the hell? And then he tried again. What the hell? And again. What the hell? And again. What the hell? Until the words echoed in his head. For how long did you plan on keeping that up? When Ryuk turned his head up, he saw her, not looking at him but directly at the ocean instead. So I can't fly? We can't fly? He added as he rose to his feet, eyes knitted. He turned to the ocean, then began walking forward toward it. Arriving just a couple of meters away, he bent down to one knee, dipping his hands into it. Looks pretty good, he muttered. But then, footsteps echoed out behind him, coming from none other than Orlith. He watched as she slowly reached her hand forward, spreading it toward the sea, and all of a sudden, an invisible force slammed directly into the waters, instantly blowing everything apart, revealing the seabed for up to a 100-meter distance. But just 5 seconds later, Ryuk watched as the water particles still hanging in the air all immediately faded away, and like a glitch, the open path on the water's surface instantly closed back up. But it didn't close because the water was falling back into place. Instead, it seemed as if reality had been flipped, the water just reappearing as it was earlier, like a glitch in time reversal. This is a distance low realm, with a highlighted distance of 100 meters. All force exerted only travels as far as 100 meters, and takes one only as far as 100 meters. Also, flying is prohibited, she explained as she took down her raised arms. A distance low realm? Ryuk wondered to himself, watching as she resumed walking into the sea before him. She continued deeper and deeper, and soon enough her head was within the water. Ryuk watched her remain standing in the water for a couple of minutes before she finally emerged. When she did, she was visibly agitated, her face a bit red, as he watched her inhale and exhale for air. That's weird. She walked out of the sea afterward. The breathing has been sent to that of an average mortal. I can only last 3 minutes at most underwater, she explained, as Ryuk's eyes gleamed. So crossing over the sea by attempting to swim out of it is impossible, and we also can't fly above it. He muttered beneath his breath. For now, crossing and leaving this island is successfully on pause. With that ruled out, the only thing he could do was turn his back and look back at the island, swallowing a bit. But then his eyes lit up. Perhaps all we need is the island itself? He thought to himself. It wasn't that big of an island, if he was able to fly, but crippled to the ground, it looked bigger than anything. Okay, I know the plan. First, I need to find some sort of aerial beast, then have it take me up and fly me around to see the entire island. I can see everything at once like that, he silently muttered, eyes flashing at his good plan. All of a sudden, boom! It was a heavy shake that shook the entire island, and Ryuk almost tumbled off his feet. He quickly turned his head behind him in shock, and his jaw almost fell off. Right on the shore was a gigantic ship, sleek and dark. It looked like one of those luxurious ships the ultra-rich used on Endearth for vacations. You have a ship too? First was the flying spacecraft, which she had left behind for the group to return to Amamura. And now it was a gigantic ship? Just how rich was she, dishing out all of these things like they were nothing but toys? These things could easily go for billions of Amacoins, especially in Amamura, where things like this weren't the norm at all. She suddenly jumped up into the air, landing right on top of the ship, before turning those cold eyes onto him. You coming? She asked, before disappearing. Ryuk turned his back to look at the island. Shouldn't we at least check the island out first to look for any clues? Or something that could have been left behind? He wondered. But he also knew, if he eventually found something, the chances of him leaving without her were close to nil, since he had no idea how to build a boat. In the end, he could only jump up onto the ship's deck as it quickly began picking up speed, under Orlith's control. Like Ryuk had said, the ship was truly a luxurious one. For one, there were a total of 3 rooms, each designed to be an absolute masterpiece, even better than any room he'd ever seen on a ship. Nice. This really might not be a nightmare like I thought, he said to himself as he entered the bedroom. For some strange reason, everything was a golden color, with a faint pink hue mixed in. But Ryuk wasn't a picky person, so he simply walked over to a juice dispenser nearby, poured himself a glass of what looked like orange juice, and made his way on top the bed. He was thrown upward, almost spilling all the drink, but he saved it at the head of the bed as he lay down. Oh! He muttered under his breath when he looked to the side and found a pink sleep mask. Without wasting time, he grabbed it and wore it onto his face, the softness making him smile like an idiot. Grabbing the juice, he took a satisfying sip, digging himself deeper into the comfort of the plush bed with a satisfied smile. Now this is the life. To think that idiot refuses to come, he thought, snickering to himself as he remained in the comfort of the bed. He took a long sip before he set the cup to the side, placing both arms behind his head and preparing to doze off. But he had yet to descend halfway when his ears twitched. Then the knobs began twisting, then followed by a weird sound, one that seemed like zips being unbuttoned. What's going on? Ryuk thought to himself as he felt the door swing open, and unconsciously, he turned his gaze towards the direction, although he couldn't see anything. But all hell was let loose in the next second when he felt the world around him spinning, and then he was sent flying straight into the cold water, sending forth a ripple as his hands hurriedly reached for the eye mask he wore, pulling it off his face. Hey! He screamed, glaring at the window where a golden gaze bobbed up. It was none other than Orlith, her face ablaze with a fiery expression, and to Ryuk's faint astonishment, a pink hue dusted her cheeks. Hey, what was that for? He shouted, feeling the injustice. What were you doing in my room? She retorted coldly as Ryuk's eyebrows rose. What? You asked me to pick the one I liked, he said, one eyebrow arched. You chose the wrong one. Wrong one? TCH, you could have said that before. Ryuk thought in disbelief, his teeth grinding as he glared at Orlith, whose expression remained unapologetic. But then, his head snapped away from her, his gaze dropping downward. Not to himself, but beneath him. Ryuk heard the sound, distinct from the crashing sea waves, emanating from below. Hey, are you okay? Orlith asked suspiciously, but she received no reply. Ryuk spread his hands to the sides, parting the water as he tried to elevate himself. His eyes locked onto the source of the sound, but it was dark, too dark for an unknown reason. It was a full moon. It should never have been this dark. He glanced upward, noticing the pale white moon in the sky beginning to shift, its hue turning into an ominous red. The sudden transformation startled not only Ryuk but also Orlith, who turned her head toward the sky with suspicion. The billowing sea waves. They've stopped, she muttered, noting the crashing waves had fallen into an eerie silence. Hey, get out of the water, she called to Ryuk, whose brows furrowed. He could feel it. Something moved beneath him, silent and unseen in the darkness. He tried to fly upward, but a strange law in this realm held him back. In the end, he could only turn to Orlith. Can you give me a hand? He asked, reaching out. A slit opened in her palm, and the head of a worm emerged. Instead of its usual colossal form, it took the shape of a rope, descending toward him. Ryuk grabbed it when it was within arm's reach, and he was slowly lifted upward when suddenly, the heavy sound roared again, and this time it was loud enough for even Orlith to hear. Ryuk's head snapped to the side just in time to see a colossal maw stretching toward him. Orlith's eyes widened in shock as a gigantic, snake-like creature snapped up Ryuk's figure, swallowing him in one gulp before burrowing back into the water. She stood frozen for a second, staring at the half-severed thread dangling where Ryuk should have been. It had happened too fast for her to react. Instinctively, she tried leaping from the window frame to pursue the creature, but the entire ship tilted violently, sending her skidding off her feet and slamming into the wall. A deafening roar sent cracks splintering through the ship as something relentlessly slammed into it. Boom! An entire section of the ship was blasted into oblivion as a golden fist smashed through it. Orlith burst out, her golden worm piercing forward into the sky with incredible force, lifting her into the air with blinding speed. Golden threads formed around her, and she landed on them, using them as a platform to remain levitating. She stood exactly 90 meters above the ship, and only now could she see it. Tentacles, each as large as the ship itself, wrapped around it, oozing poisonous liquid that melted the hull. A kraken? She muttered in shock. But in the next instant, a tentacle slipped out of the space behind her, hurtling toward her with enough force to tear open a black hole around her figure. It was fast. One moment, Ryuk was being pulled up by the thread, aiming to return to the ship. The next, he was here, in this gloomy, putrid world of darkness. I got swallowed? He muttered in faint disbelief, cautiously turning his head upward. It was a slimy world, venomous liquid dripping from every corner. The sheer sliminess confirmed what had happened. Suddenly, a notification flashed. An ancient bestial creature, a kraken, has swallowed the host. Quest issued. Defeat a kraken. Rewards? A bestial creature, huh? Ryuk muttered, his cautious expression peeling away into a disappointed sigh. Just when I thought things would remain peaceful for some time. The sound of bones cracking echoed as Ryuk tilted his head sideways, loosening his stiff joints. Rising upright, he remained silent for a while, quelling his rapidly beating heart before whispering, "Activate King's Aura." From the squirming darkness within the depths of the ancient creature, a flame appeared, blue in color, a tiny spark illuminating this gloomy world. Then, it burst forth with power, banishing the darkness and flooding the space with light. Ryuk's grin faded into a cold, distant gaze, the look of someone seemingly beyond this world. He heard the howl of resistance from outside, the world around him squirming as the creature's walls began to close in. A torrent of venomous liquid poured from every direction, like a venomous tide surging to dissolve him. Silently, he raised his hands. Activate Beyonder Dragon. A subtle transformation shimmered as white scales escaped the boundaries of his skin, aligning perfectly. His hands shifted into claws, soon covered in a purple light, and then spinned his hand in one circle revolution around him, inches before the venom could touch him. A droning sound was what followed as the entire world around him was spotted into two like a pipe severed by a sharp blade. The venomous liquid heading for him spilled back into the sea as the crimson moon once more shone its ominous light on his figure. A foot covered in purple tattoos and shimmering white scales gently stepped onto the water surface. One would have expected him to sink, but the surface of the water had turned to liquid glass, strong enough to support Ryuk's weight. Circular ripples spread with every step he took. The waves around him splashed powerfully, and a sudden explosion of golden light, mingled with dark, venomous liquid spraying into the air, drew his attention. High above, 8 massive tentacles writhed and lashed around wildly in the sky. But that wasn't all. Colossal worms extended from a golden-haired figure standing atop one of the golden worms, engaged in a fierce battle of threads and tentacles. This figure was none other than Orlith, her hands spread wide. Slits had opened in her palms, each birthing 3 enormous golden worms with gaping maws lined with rows of sharp fangs. They lunged and twisted toward the approaching tentacles, gripping and ripping them apart with a single bite, venomous liquids raining down from the sky. Though it seems she held the upper hand, and that too with ease, Ryuk's thoughts differ. The more tentacles were served, the more new ones were quick to grow too for each severed tentacle. Worse still, the tentacle's strength and aura grew even more powerful with each regrowth. Soon enough she was being forced to evade, her golden worms frantically lashing out at the Kraken's limbs, but it has little effect in keeping things at bay. So, it's like a gigantic octopus, with tentacles strong enough to latch onto anything and melt it into nothing, Ryuk muttered, standing far from the battle, observing like an outsider. Trying to sever the annoying tentacles might seem smart, but really, the Kraken's the only one who gains from it, he reasoned. 2 more tentacles replace every severed one, and their power grows with each cut. Sooner or later, they'll be too strong to sever, and the attacker will be caught in their grasp, melted by the venomous poison. His gaze drifted from the chaotic tentacles and the increasingly dire explosion, diving deeper into the water instead. The Kraken is an intelligent beast. Knowing its tentacular ability, it keeps them out to attack while hiding its head deep underwater. But like any beast, it reveals its strength while concealing its weakness, making it easier to defeat, Ryuk muttered. A moment later, the water's surface rippled backward, unleashing a tsunami that surged into the distance. Ryuk vanished from where he stood, moving with blinding speed. The force carried him deeper into the water as he pierced toward where he sensed the Kraken's head was buried. The Kraken seemed to sense him, as 18 tentacles flashed toward Ryuk, their edges shifting into sharp blades that cleanly sliced through space itself. But he had observed Orlith's difficulty in handling them and learned from it. Instead of severing them with his claws, he weaved through them like a ghost, dodging with precision while rapidly closing the distance. Air began to leave his lungs due to the 3-minute underwater rule of this realm, but his eyes remained focused on its aim, fixed beneath him. He could sense himself nearing a loudly beating heart. The tentacles lashed faster, but it did nothing but confirm more to work that his plan was succeeding. Unable to grab him, the Kraken formed a gigantic wall made of tentacles around its head, while 5 more tentacles unfurled in a typical defense and attack formation. Not only did it shield itself with tentacles, but it also kept 5 free to skewer its enemy. Ryuk, however, having seen through the facade, remained unfazed. His hands reached forward, a void grimoire slipping from the void and landing in his grasp. The page fluttered open to an image of a vortex, and a moment later, void vortex, he thought as the sharp end of a tentacle flashed toward his forehead. Ryuk didn't dodge, letting it stop an inch from piercing his veins before his figure blinked, reappearing to the side. With a single slash, he cleanly severed the tentacle. As it fell, 2 more sprouted instantly from the point, heading for him. But before they could reach Ryuk with his hands holding the severed tentacle, vanished into a conjured void vortex. The 2 new tentacles struck nothing, their focus thrown into disarray as they looked around, realizing their prey was nowhere to be found. When Ryuk reappeared, he stood on a slimy head, the sharp end of a tentacle in his hands. His eyes locked onto a single pitch-black eye, brimming with shock. It had encased itself in a wall of tentacles to block its prey, yet he now stood atop its head, holding its half-severed but sharp end of its own tentacle. It reacted instantly, its nearest tentacles speeding toward Ryuk's frame, attempting to skewer him through. But a gentle whisper echoed. "Go to sleep." The words pierced the Kraken's soul, the first it could hear and understand beyond the usual screams of horror its prey elicited when it feeds on them. So soothing were they that, for a moment, its rapidly advancing tentacles halted, its eyes slowly drifting closed. But those closing eyes widened in shock when a sound reached it. The squelching pierce of its slimy flesh. The sharp end of the tentacle Ryuk held had been thrust through the space above its head, plunging straight into its brain, the blade tearing out from behind. Its eyes remained wide in shock, darkness clouding them. But the last thing it saw was that blue gaze, so warm, filled with such love. It doubted they belonged to its killer. Its intent to launch a final attack faded, caught in the beauty of those shimmering blue eyes. "You fought well. Go to sleep now." The voice echoed once more, as he slowly floated away up above, away from it. Those beautiful eyes slowly faded away, being covered by the darkness that swallowed its vision. How surreal of an evil, was the final thought in the Kraken's mind as it took its last breath and sank into the depths of the Forsaken Sea. The water's surface rippled heavily as Ryuk's head burst from its depths. The moment he emerged, he felt the golden thread before him, grabbed it, and jerked it, using the force to propel himself into the air and land back on the ship. He collapsed onto his knees right after, hands clutching his throat as he coughed loudly. "So, this is what it feels like to almost run out of air underwater?" he thought, coughing a few more times before finally regaining his composure. Glancing to the side, he found Orlith reclining against the wall, arms crossed, her expression suspicious. "You didn't die?" she asked. The question sent Ryuk's mood plummeting, and his expression dropped further. "I expected, and are you okay? I'm so sorry for my childish action of throwing you out of a ship's window and almost getting you killed," he shot back. But her suspicious expression merely faded to her usual cold one, as she barely hummed under her breath before turning and stepping away. But while she might not display much, thoughts were going through Orlith's mind. To think an Apocrypha stage cultivator can survive being swallowed alive by a middle Exignis stage Kraken, she silently thought. Besides, the Kraken's aura weakened for some reason before it left, and then he bobs up on the water's surface? It can't just have retreated for no reason, so something must have happened, and I'm sure he has something to do with it, she concluded, reaching the ship's control area and starting it back up. "Tch." Ryuk clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction as he rose to his feet. His attention shifted to the ship, and he hummed softly, noting its sorry state. Parts of the hull had caved in from the Kraken's heavy tentacles wrapping around it, while others sizzled, venom still burning their surfaces. "The ship still moves," he realized as it suddenly picked up speed. He looked forward to seeing Orlith standing at the wheel, steering it forward. "I have no clue what's happening. She keeps steering the ship left and right as if she has a map. Does she really know what she's doing? Or is she just driving us blindly?" Ryuk thought suspiciously, but then turned his gaze away from her, looking up at the sky. The crimson hue painting the moon slowly dissipated, giving way to frigid white light that illuminated the sea once more as the billowing waves resumed. "If we face such a dangerous creature on our path, there's a chance it only happened because we're on the right path," he reasoned, left with no choice but to trust her lead. He couldn't get off the ship now. He'd nearly drowned, and the fear of the sea had settled deeply in his psyche. Hijacking the ship and tying her up was a viable move that would at least put him in control, but he hadn't a single clue about their direction or destination. He might as well leave things to her, since she seemed to know more than he did. With that, he turned his attention to the sizzling, bent-in walls of the ship. If things are left like this, the ship won't survive a second Kraken attack in its current dilapidated state. It needs patching, he reasoned, stepping toward a caved-in section. His hands reached forward, pressing onto the bent surface, and he commanded, "Activate Sovereign Rewriting." Instantly, golden dots of light appeared around Ryuk. The world shifted into one of bonds. He could see the ship's wall, its bonds slightly disordered. With careful manipulation, his will unfolded, straightening them. Within seconds, the damaged section was restored, and the ship's surface was now as good as new. I can patch it up with sovereign rewriting, Ryuk confirmed before turning to the hundreds of damaged areas. Without wasting time, he got to work. He touched the sizzling, venom-coated parts, restoring them, and straightened the crumpled walls, returning them to their original form. He worked silently and wordlessly, but his actions didn't go unnoticed. Orlith glanced back at the ship, watching it slowly return to its previous shape, somehow even sturdier than before. Ryuk moved from one crack to the next, tying himself to the walls to fix parts high in the air. He continued quietly until early dawn, when the sun's rays began filtering from the sky's edge. "He's more reliable than I thought," Orlith mused, a small, amused smile flickering at the corner of her lips. But her eyes narrowed at the realization, and the smile faded, replaced by an even colder expression. Ryuk's backbone cracked as he yawned, a satisfied smile creeping onto his lips. Now it can survive one more attack, he thought, admiring his handiwork, but then felt the sun's rays on his face. To think the fixing would take an entire night, he muttered, stepping toward the bay where Orlith was steering. He stood to the side, reclining silently. She avoided looking again, keeping her gaze cold and fixed on the distance until, after an hour, the awkward silence prompted her to turn and meet his eyes with a cold stare. "What?" she asked. "Where are we going?" Ryuk replied. "You'll know when we get there," she said curtly, turning back to the sea. "And when are we going to get there?" he pressed. "We'll get there when we get there," she answered, a response that made his expression crumble even further. How did that even answer the question? He thought, watching her turn her head back into the ship before commenting. "Nice work," she said, a comment that made Ryuk feel a warm feeling envelope his chest, but that was quick to dissipate when she continued. "I didn't ask you to do it, though," she replied, satisfied to see his expression crumble back. "Would it hurt you to be positive for once?" Ryuk asked, and she forced out a in reply. "Also," Ryuk said, turning away from her and to the distant sea. "I didn't mend the ship for you," he said, drawing a raised eyebrow which Ryuk couldn't see. "If it gets attacked by a second kraken or some other beast, it will get even more damaged and might stop working. In such a case, I might end up getting stranded here at sea for devil knows how long. That's why I fixed it." The reply took Orlith's surprise. As a member of royalty, she was accustomed to people acting in her name, even when their motives are usually self-serving. She watched as they all still tried to imply that they did it for her, either to gain her favor or connection to her royal family. But all of this hypocrisy makes her view them lowlifes who will always be beneath the name of her royal family. If she was asked to describe them, she would reply curly with just one word: dogs. It naturally seemed like fixing the ship was just one way to earn her pleasing eyes, but judging by what he had spoken and how he said it, it was clear he did it for his own good, and he wasn't hypocritic enough to try and make it look like a selfless noble deed. An act that seemed selfish, but which Orlith strangely found endearing. This prompted her to say a few words after the early morning breeze blew the pressure that surrounded the bay. "You didn't know where the gate was going," she said, watching his ear twitch though his eyes remained fixated into the distance. "And yet you still followed in?" she asked, as he turned to the side before replying. "Maybe because I was confident you knew the way. Perhaps that's why I followed you in," he asked her with a smile that seemed more a cunning grin than smile. "No, you didn't follow me, nor were you confident I knew the way," she countered, noting his smile widen. "You sure?" "Yes. Just like the ship, I believe you also did this for your own good or curiosity, perhaps," she said, narrowing her eyes to watch a shift in his expression, and it did. "You're quite smart," he replied, turning back to the front of the ship. Ryuk of course didn't do it for her, and he didn't give enough damn about her to care for her approval either. He only cared about the loyalty quest, and when the system had given him a new quest, he had switched his focus on that. Even if the group had eventually agreed not to step in, he would have still rushed in regardless. The reason why he made it seem like he was taking her permission and acting like that was so he could rally a part of the group to come in with him. Then it would be more than just him facing the danger. Things would be more diluted, giving him greater options to use them all to his advantages. And truly enough, being able to bring Orlith with him proved advantageous. Not only did he get a free ride to wherever the answers lay, but her presence kept the Kraken occupied, making it easier to defeat. If he came here alone, the reality was he would most likely still be on that island, carving up trees to make a boat after finding no clue. "So," he said after a pause, "do you know where we're heading?" To his surprise, she answered. "Can you not sense it?" she asked, drawing his attention. "Sense what?" "The powerful aura in this realm. It's coming from that direction." She pointed straight ahead. "A powerful aura?" Ryuk muttered beneath his breath as he looked into the distance, and yet apart from the flickering rays of sunlight and crashing sea waves, there was nothing more. "I guess having divine sense really does have its perk, huh?" Orlith said, a slight tease to her cold tone, as Ryuk hummed. Perhaps. There was an aura that was present on this realm, and Orlith was simply steering the boat to it. Ryuk doesn't have divine sense, so he has zero clue about any aura. "If I had come here alone, I would spend years at least before reaching my goal," he thought silently to himself, something that led to a different worrying realization. If Hurricane is an energy, then it must come with its own divine sense. The reason why I don't have must be because I'm only at the first level, he thought, gaze drifting to the purple tattoo on his palms. "There's a lot I still need to improve on," he mused. And when he remembered the true reason why he had decided to risk through an unknown dangerous gate for the system's quest. And still so much to learn about this world. Activate system interface? Congratulations. Host on completing the quest. Find the missing archguards. Rewards issues. Plus 10 million EXP. Plus 7 level up cards. Congratulations on completing the time limit quest. Embark on a mission to find the reason for the Archguard's death. Rewards. Plus 1 minor knowledge roulette. Huh? What's a minor knowledge roulette? Ryuk asked in confusion. The first quest has given him the normal rewards as usual. EXPs and level up cards. But this time limit quest actually gave him something he wasn't used to. A knowledge roulette is a shop tool. There are probably hundreds of thousands of different manuals within the shop. The knowledge roulette is like a search bar where the host can input his confusion or what he chooses to learn, and the roulette will find the most relevant manual that explains the confusion the best. This is one level higher than either I or host searching through the shop manually. The system replied. Ryuk thought about it for a while before his eyes beamed. "I wish to use the knowledge roulette now," he said. "Knowledge roulette has now been activated. Host need only think about the confusing topic and the manual in the shop will appear before host." The system replied, and it was less than 5 seconds when it appeared before him. A book with the title, Ancient Script, Lost Knowledge of Hurricane Energy. Of course, the one thing he badly wanted to know right now was hurricane energy and how he could progress in its cultivation. And right before him, he had the best manual on the shop tab that could finally give him what he wants. Buy. Host has successfully obtained the manual Ancient Script, Lost Knowledge of Hurricane, which goes for 120,000 purchase points. What the hell? Ryuk screamed in his mind, shock gripping him as his hands clutched the railings tightly. Did you just say 120,000 purchase points? I don't even have 500,000 purchase points, he exclaimed. But the notification flashed again. The knowledge roulette isn't just a more adept search bar. It searches the best manuals and automatically unlocks them without needing the host to use his own purchase points. Although, unlike purchase points, a knowledge roulette can only be used to buy a single knowledge manual. Now that host has used it, it's gone until the host manages to acquire a new one. The system notification flashed, and a new light gleamed in Ryuk's eyes. In short, the knowledge roulette this time is as good as 1.2 million purchase points rewards. The time limit quest was more rewarding than I thought. To be honest, he had been disappointed when all he got from the time limit quest was a single reward, although his clueless Niza and hope that it was something unimaginable buried that feeling. But now that it had unlocked a manual that would have normally cost him 1.2 million purchase points, it was somehow more rewarding than he initially thought. He could see the manual was now available in his shop and hummed slightly in doubt. She's standing just 20 meters away. Is it okay to check it out in front of her? He muttered to himself, but then shrugged it off. What type of cultivator doesn't keep a manual in their storage ring? A moment later, the book appeared in his palms, but it seemed bringing it out was a mistake. The second the book was out, it burst out an incredibly bright purple light that, for a moment, seemed to make the entire world dim, leaving it as the only light source available. Orlith grew very alarmed by the sudden bizarre energy wave that appeared in the radar of her divine sense, almost dimming the sun's light. But she remained calm, seeing that whatever it was seemed to emanate from his palms. Eventually, the light began cooling off, receding, and just moments later, it was gone. Now Ryuk could see what it truly was, and he had no words to describe it. Even though the system had said it was a manual, and Ryuk was expecting a grimoire as usual, this was different. It wasn't a book at all. Instead, it was a stone. A slab of stone with various runic symbols and letters written over its surface. Quite heavy, even though it was just the size of a regular stone. Ryuk's fingers stretched forward, reaching for the runes. Even though he had no special knowledge of runic symbols, these were strangely comprehensible. But just before he focused on them, footsteps echoed behind him. What's that? It was none other than Orlith. While Hai's first instinct was to hide it away, he decided to do the exact opposite, turning to Orlith and revealing it. What does it look like to you? He asked as she furrowed her eyebrows at the bizarre symbols, but the curious light in her eyes was quick to dim. A stone with written weird symbols? She retorted. Found this from somewhere extra special. Was hoping that, since you're so knowledgeable, you can help me interpret it, Ryuk asked with a slick smile. Orlith took one glance at the tab before turning her back and leaving. No, she replied curtly, disappearing down the ship. But why? Ryuk shouted from behind. Because I've never seen them before? She retorted, disappearing into the room as a slick smile appeared on Ryuk's face. Just like I guessed, only I can hope to get the content of this. He thought to himself as he looked to the side, finding a seat on the bay. It would take some time to fully translate this stuff, and he felt it would be better doing that while sitting. After taking his seat, his right hand trailed onto the stone slab placed on his lap, but then he watched something truly abnormal. His hurricane tattoos, when coming in contact with an object, copy the energy of that object. The runes on the slab were dull and lifeless, yet when his fingers touched them, he felt the runes light up in the same purplish light of his tattoo. The runes and symbols began glowing as if his hurricane energy had activated them, and all of a sudden, the world around him began to turn dreamy. Various colors shifted out of the world, making his senses slow, and his attention remained glued onto these glowing runic symbols. They widened, and soon enough, he himself went limp, eyes staring at the slab. But even though to anyone he simply seemed like one whose entire attention was on the slab on his lap, the truth was, Ryuk was long gone, in a realm far away from reality. A dreamy world, a cosmos where all colors seemed to exist. Where am I? He muttered to himself, slowly coming to a realization of the reality around him. When he did, his heart almost spiraled out of control, although it remained deadly silent and calm. Right now, he was in a sitting position but no longer on the bay of the ship. Instead, he was sitting on a single-person chair, seemingly made just for him, and right across him was a table, its height to the center of his navel. But what took his breath were two things. In this world, it was like a void. A white void with colossal stars drifting around him, which normally would have covered all of his vision. Yet he seemed to see them as so close yet so distant all at once. What really took his breath away though, was what sat across, separated from the table in front of him. An unknown entity. The state he was in felt oddly familiar, similar to the state Ryuk would usually enter when he accessed his soul space. The difference, however, was stark. The entity's body was composed of motes of light, but unlike the white motes in Ryuk's soul realm, these motes were colored to match the surrounding cosmos. They shimmered with every hue imaginable, as if this being were one with the void itself. When Ryuk raised his eyes to look at the figure before him, he was shocked. There was no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no ears, only motes, shifting and swirling motes that formed a featureless head, the same prismatic color as the space around them. The being sat calmly on the other side of the table, elbows resting on the surface, fingers laced together, and head turned directly toward Ryuk. Though with no eyes, it was hard to tell what looking even meant. Ryuk turned away for a moment and looked down at himself. He was the same. Like the being before him, his body now shimmered with soul energy. But unlike the other, his motes held only two colors. White, representing his life aura, and purple, the color of his hurricane energy. I'm in my soul form, so my real body must still be sitting on the chair, still holding the stone slab. Ryuk thought, a spike of realization piercing through him. His heart leapt. Right now, his physical body was completely defenseless. Orleith had disappeared into her room. If anything were to suddenly emerge, like that Kraken had before, he wouldn't have time to react or even be able to react at all. And yet, something deep in his soul told him. This faceless being sitting across from him, this was the one he should be most wary of. Who are you? Ryuk asked, the most basic way to begin a conversation. He watched as the figure stirred for the first time, unlacing its fingers and pointing calmly at its chest. I am the spirit of the ancient hurricane script, it replied. The voice. It echoed repeatedly across the void, a sound that should have been jarring and terrifying, yet somehow it soothed. Each syllable rang out with such clarity that it felt as though the words were being etched directly into his soul. The ancient hurricane script was a stone slab whose runes I hoped to decipher and read? Ryuk asked with a faint bit of suspicion and caution. It is not a book, so it cannot be read. It is a script of legacy, passed down from one destroyed timeline to the next. The entity replied. And now it has found its way into your hands, the hurricane holder in a living timeline, it explained. I, the spirit of the hurricane script, am the medium by which this knowledge will continue to be passed down to the future bearers of the hurricane, which you currently are. Finally, Ryuk grasped what this meant. He had looked at the runes on the slab and realized there were too few of them. Even if he deciphered each one, the information he would gain would be like reading a single sentence. It would never be enough to understand what hurricane truly was. But now he understood better. The runes weren't knowledge themselves. They were a gate, and his hurricane energy was the key. When he touched the rune and it lit up, that was the gate opening, bringing him here to a realm where he met with the spirit of the script, which would likely answer his questions and pass down the legacy of hurricane. Instead of merely reading a book or deciphering symbols, he could sit before one who was, in a way, the book itself and ask the questions he wanted. Knowing this, his caution eased, and not willing to waste a single more second of this opportunity, he asked, what is hurricane energy? And how is it different from apex energy, abyssal energy, or etheric energy? Why doesn't it come with a divine sense, like the rest? Or will that awaken naturally as I progress? Also, what are the cultivation stages? I know the first is called the imitation stage, but what are the others? How do I advance if there's no hurricane energy in the air to absorb, or do I just meditate on it? He caught himself and stopped, realizing he had just thrown out a flood of questions all at once. But these were questions he had longed for answers to, and now that he had the chance, he couldn't help himself. Surprisingly, the figure showed no sign of irritation. It leaned back slightly in its chair, fingers once again resting calmly on the table. Let's start with the first question, it said. What is hurricane energy? Ryuk forced his heart to steady and listened closely. Everything a cultivator owns is given. It began. Power is given through blood. Legacies are given through birth. Skills are inherited from those who came before. Many energies are this way. Your abyssal energy came from your null bloodline and your Etheric energy from your draconic heritage, it said. Ryuk flinched at that as he wanted to scream out, "How did you know?" but decided to stay silent in the end. Whatever is given can be predicted, controlled, caged. Apex, abyssal, Etheric. They are inherited energies one way or another. But Hurricane is born from refusal. Ryuk paused at this, and when the script spirit continued, his eyes slowly began widening. It is not inherited, nor is it passed down. It is seized. To walk the path of Hurricane is to tear away every skin you were born with, and abandon every name you were meant to carry. The being leaned closer, its faceless gaze pressing into Ryuk's soul. When you abandoned the blood of the dragon, and the abyss, seemed quite abnormal and out of place. Doesn't it? A bit too sudden? Or maybe, it seemed like you had fallen out of grace. But really, that was the Hurricane call. The first awakening to those who possess the capability to walk the path of Hurricane, and the first you took towards ever beginning to walk the path to true power. Ryuk could still remember it vividly. When the Beyonder bloodline arrived, slaughtering both the Null and Jade Dragon bloodlines and forcefully merging them to create the Hurricane Gem, he had always had a question at the back of his mind. Even though his previous bloodlines had told him that when Hurricane and Apex merge, they form a new bloodline called Hurricane, why couldn't he control it? Even after he had gotten rid of Zarkul and fused with his skeletal system, Ryuk still hadn't been able to truly control Hurricane energy. When he shifted to his Null transformation, that purple energy usually covered his claws, but that was the extent of it. Why, despite having Apex and abyssal energy flowing in his veins, could he still not control Hurricane? Now he knew the answer. The only true way to control Hurricane energy wasn't by inheriting it from his previous bloodlines, nor by having both the Null and Draconic bloodlines flowing within him. It was by forcefully seizing it, as the Beyonder Dragon had done. It had crushed both his Null and Jade Dragon essence, forcibly seizing their energy before turning it into Hurricane and passing it to Ryuk. And that had only happened when Ryuk refused his original bloodlines and the names they tried to force on him. The entity's words were true. True Hurricane is born only from refusal. It isn't inherited, rather seized. Now he understood what Hurricane was and why it differed from other energies. But many questions remained, and he turned to the being, who relaxed back in its seat before continuing. This definition of Hurricane that you understand, Ryuk, is simply the layman's term I use to clear the confusion you may hold, the spirit said. But truly, Hurricane is far more than something seized or born from refusal. In truth, Hurricane isn't an energy. Ryuk found this hard to grasp. Do you still remember Sage Esh-Turion? The spirit asked. The cloaked being you met when you first awakened to Hurricane? Ryuk's memories drifted to the wizard who held the staff and tried to pass his Hurricane energy to him before everything exploded. He was one of the greatest cultivators to ever wield Hurricane, and he believed Hurricane is a memory. But truly, Hurricane is a stain, the spirit continued. A stain? Ryuk asked, confused. When worlds end, the spirit began. So too do their energies, laws, gods, and truths. But sometimes, these deaths are not clean. Sometimes, the war between energies is so great it burns even the roots of existence, leaving behind a stain. A stain that remembers, and this stain becomes Hurricane energy. It is not a singular element but a recording of collapse, embedded with fragments of all that came before. It's not a singular element but a recording of collapse, like a memory that remembers each death of a previous timeline. Ryuk thought, storing the important bits he felt he needed to remember, in the way he understood it. The white-cloaked sage you met, Esh-Turion, was the last surviving master of Hurricane energy from a timeline long erased, the spirit said as Ryuk listened attentively. He discovered something that may be true before his unfortunate erasure. Even though gods, devils, worlds, and histories are erased when the cosmos begins its cycle of erasure and creation, it somehow leaves one thing alone, the only force that refuses absolute erasure, and that is hurricane. Even when timelines are consumed, hurricane energy drifts, remembering it all. Esh-Turayan theorized that reality itself was the dream of a sleeping true god. The spirit continued, prompting Ryuk to raise an eyebrow. That sounds stupid, he said. Maybe it is, the spirit replied, neither arguing nor convincing. Instead, it continued. He believed this illusion forms layered timelines, each repeating with slight shifts. Hurricane energy was the leak in that illusion, a loophole, or the glitch that gives the sleeping true god an anchor to his own true reality, the one that God itself uses to avoid falling into its own dream and becoming lost. He believed that if all this ending in erasure is just the dream of someone, then the only key to breaking it is the same thing the sleeping god uses to stay awake and avoid falling into its dream. So, to him, hurricane energy is the only spell that can break the illusion of reality, Ryuk said, and the spirit nodded. Yes, that's exactly what Esh-Turayan believed. And while you might feel quick to call him an idiot who lived too long to remain sane, he was once a lord of hurricane, a stage only a few hurricane holders ever reach across infinite destroyed timelines. His words are worthy of being quoted and passed down, the spirit said, as Ryuk hummed. Truly, he had thought the sage was a bit lost. Ryuk knew what illusions were, one of the pathways Etherius cultivators could take. They looked real but weren't, and they could be broken. But to call all of reality an illusion, that seemed too far-fetched. Still, this doesn't bear much use for you, does it? The spirit asked, and Ryuk nodded. That's true. Reality is an illusion? Hurricane is the spell to break it? These theories sound cool, but they don't have much use for me. The nulls coming for me won't sit down and let me explain how their reality is an illusion, nor will the knowledge be enough to have them willingly give back what they stole in exchange. If it doesn't increase my power, it doesn't aid my quest, he said. The spirit nodded, and Ryuk could swear he heard it wheeze, as if laughing, though he couldn't be sure. Esh-Turayan would have argued the opposite. Something like, knowledge is power, and he'd be right, because he was truly powerful, the spirit said with a helpless tone before turning to Ryuk. But let's talk of hurricane in ways that could provide substantial use to you. And that brings us to the cultivation stages of hurricane and how to climb the ladder. So, to continue with your question, what are the cultivation stages of hurricane, and how does one progress? Said, and Ryuk nodded. To think of hurricane from the perspective of other energy cultivations sounds reasonable, doesn't it? The spirit suddenly asked, and Ryuk's eyebrow faintly knitted. His tone was that of contradiction. But truly, this perspective of hurricane as an energy, while understandable for beginners, is the wrong approach. Only those who do not truly understand hurricane will label it as such, he explained, and Ryuk's brow creased. The only reason he even knew the first stage of hurricane was called the imitation stage was because the system had labeled it as such. But now, hearing this entity's words, he began to doubt that label. Perhaps it was simply the perspective of someone who didn't truly understand. Hurricane isn't an energy. Like I previously said, the spirit continued. The best perspective is to look at it the way Esh-Turayan did, as a memory. Ryuk's ears perked up. While it's acceptable to label the first stage of hurricane cultivation as the imitation stage, from the perspective of someone like Esh-Turayan who truly understood hurricane, it is better known as the path of memory. And the first path for one newly awakened to hurricane is called the thief path. The thief path, Ryuk repeated, surprised. Yes, the thief does nothing but take, does he not? That is how one begins the path of hurricane. And what you will steal are the other energies. You may have noticed various runes appear on your body since your hurricane awakening, haven't you? The figure asked. Ryuk nodded. Those runes are conduits that store the energy you steal. But they're not just conduits. They also grant you the ability to use what you've taken, though the energy usually doesn't last very long once contact with the source is broken. Ryuk's eyes lit up with realization. Of course, he understood now. Every time someone touched him, his tattoos would light up and copy their energy. But as soon as contact was broken, the energy would quickly fade. The time was always too brief for him to effectively use any techniques. Treat Hurricane like a thief who has stolen the world, then lost it, and also forgotten everything about it. When it touches something of the world, it feels a brief sense of familiarity. It holds it for a few seconds, and then it drops it. Why does it drop it? The being asked. Ryuk muttered softly, because it has no memory of it. Exactly. It has no memory, so it cannot keep it. That is why it is wrong to think of Hurricane as a simple energy. Instead, view it through the lens of memory. In fact, begin to think of all energies from that perspective, he said, as his eyes narrowed with intensity. But how? Name a random element, he suddenly said. Flames, Ryuk answered, a common choice. The spirit began its explanation. The flame element is often seen as a destructive energy source. Most cultivators view flame from this external perspective. But to truly understand fire, you must dive into the emotions at its core. Core emotions, huh? Flames possess 3 core emotions: desire, hunger, and rebirth. Its desire lies in its hunger, consumes, and it always wants more. There's destruction in its hunger. It burns and raises, but also rebirth. After it has consumed, it clears the space for something new. A scorched forest cannot remain scorched forever. It will eventually give way to fresh life. The explanation made Ryuk pause in reflection. This isn't only applicable to flame. Think of water. Its emotion lies in adaptation. It bends, flows, and takes the shape of its container. Think of wind. It yearns to remain unchained. It moves, it drifts, it flees. There are more complex elements, like fate and time, whose purposes are harder to define. But still, within every energy lies a guiding emotion. When your runes copy an energy, they copy more than just power. They attempt to remember the emotional imprint beneath that energy. Whether it's the memory of the one you touched, or the core instinct within the element itself. If you fail to understand these emotional memories, your runes cannot retain them. And once you lose contact with the source, the memory, and the energy will fade. So, if I want to hold on to them longer, I need to understand the emotions behind the energy, Ryuk asked. Yes, and also the memories. Do not just touch to steal someone's energy. Touch to feel what lies beneath. If it's flames, understand their rage. If it's water, feel its calm. This is the first stage of hurricane cultivation, the state of imitation, or better said, the path of the thief. When you've truly learned to feel and remember the energy, the second path will reveal itself naturally, the spirit said. While he felt the urge to ask for the name of the second path, in the end, he chose to remain silent. The being had told him that if he continued down the thief path long enough, he would eventually find his way to the other path. It was asking him to discover it on his own, and he believed it must have its reasons. Silence reigned for a while as Ryuk remained in his seat, quietly comprehending all he had just been taught, reviewing it within his mind. After he felt he could recall it all and had formed a clear, concise objective, he turned upward, back to the figure who spoke. Now, to the other question, how do you climb up the cultivation path? Isn't that by understanding the emotions that lie beneath each copied element? Ryuk asked, watching the figure closely. That's correct. But more than that. The fastest way to ascend and rapidly grow one's cultivation. In Hurricane, there is just one method. It explained, as Ryuk listened attentively. Battle, the figure declared. And as it spoke, Ryuk could almost feel the entire realm quiver. Every single mote of light within the space shimmered wildly, letting loose an overwhelming tide of battle intent. Bah! Battle? Ryuk stammered. It was the last thing he expected, but the figure continued its explanation. Why is battle the cultivation path of Hurricane? This goes back, most importantly, to how Hurricane was formed in the first place. the figure said, and Ryuk's ears perked up. Hurricane is a scar, formed from the collision of energies at the end of a timeline. The end of a timeline is the most chaotic moment of that reality, featuring powerful attacks exchanged by billions of powerful races. The combined energy is enough to wipe out every single thing in that timeline from existence, signifying the timeline's end. And through this chaos, Hurricane is born, the last thing remaining after a universe-ending storm. This makes Hurricane and chaos inseparable, it explained as Ryuk hummed quietly under his breath. You may have also noticed, there's no hurricane energy in the air, right? Apex energy, abyssal energy, etheric energy. You can always find them lingering in the surrounding space, since they're the energies that birthed creation in the first place. But hurricane is the energy that ends creation. It doesn't exist unless chaos begins, and it will not grow if all you do is sit down cultivating all day and meditating all night. Besides, if you wish to feel emotion, what better time than in battle? The figure asked, though Ryuk didn't quite understand at first. You truly see who a man is when he's a step away from the grave, when life flashes before his eyes. In that moment, his emotions are at their most raw. By being placed or placing someone under emotional extremes like life and death, energy imprints become clearer, letting you see the emotions that lie beneath them even more vividly, it explained. Ryuk heaved a breath, nodding in acknowledgement. It was a lot to process, but now many of his earlier questions had been answered. He understood what he needed to do to grow this new energy of his and the best path to achieve it. But all of a sudden, the world around them began to burn away into motes of white light. And when Ryuk turned to the spirit, he saw that even it was beginning to fade. The last thing it said to him was, Therion believed the world was an illusion born from the dreams of a sleeping true god, and that each element is born from an underlying emotion. The key is to feel, and to never stop battling. Those were the final words Ryuk heard before the world faded into a dream. What's happening? He thought. Then, all at once, his awareness returned. His gaze was locked on the glowing runes of the stone slab, whose runes had begun to dim. The light soon faded completely. When Ryuk lifted his head, he noticed something. For one, the ship was no longer moving. Though he could still hear the splashing of waves, he felt no turbulence. He reined in the chaotic emotions in his heart and quietly stored the stone slab away. Then he rose to his feet, surprise etched across his face as he looked around. We've arrived. The floating ship had come to a stop. And right before Ryuk was another island. One so large it was like standing before an entire city. Tall mountains rose all over the island, and each mountain seemed to have some kind of carved opening, doors or halls, as if ancient races had carved homes right into the mountains themselves. But what he found most unnerving about it all was that it was dead quiet. There wasn't even the slightest sound being made, as if all noise itself was being suppressed. There's something in that place, Ryuk murmured beneath his breath. Something truly powerful. He didn't have divine sense, so he couldn't directly perceive it, but every cell in his body trembled faintly in silent horror. You're finally up? The words echoed behind him, and Ryuk turned just in time to see a standing figure behind him, a figure whose appearance took him by surprise. It was none other than Orlith, but now, her expression was hidden beneath a glimmering golden mask that covered her entire face. On her body, she wore full golden armor, etched with thousands upon thousands of runes, running even down to her fingers. Though the runes were dim, the aura oozing from her gave Ryuk the illusion he was standing before the sun itself, its scorching rays bearing down on him. In her hands was a massive weapon, nearly 5 meters in length. A spear, whose very tip flickered with black holes, from the torn open space that occurred with each flicker of the spear's edge. Ryuk's breath paused in his lungs at her form, his eyes squinting from the overwhelming golden light. What's with the shining armor? He asked, stepping aside as she walked forward. Orlith walked to the edge of the ship's bay, her golden hair flaring behind her in the breeze. She heaved the colossal spear, turning it toward the distant island with its sky-piercing mountains. "A Nihility is slumbering within that mountain," she said, and Ryuk froze. "A Nihility?" he asked. "Yes, one of the ancient races that once ruled over the Nihility realm, thousands of years ago." Thousands of years ago? Ryuk thought, unease curling inside him. Legend said they had all gone extinct, wiped out during the Great War with the other races. "But who would have guessed there's still one slumbering here?" she said aloud, faint surprise in her voice. "Grosk mentioned that what the Crimson Demons are doing is an awakening ritual, a ritual meant to wake a being. Could this Nihil be the original target of the Crimson Demons? They're trying to awaken a 1,000-year-old ancient being," he realized, but then grew even more confused. But why? Do the Crimson Demons bear relations with the Nihil? He asked just as Orlith withdrew her spear and turned back toward him. "It's the lord of this realm. If it dies, the realm crumbles. That's our only ticket home. Are you ready?" she asked, gazing at Ryuk, whose jaw was left hanging. "I've barely had time to organize the mess of information in my head, and now I have to face a 1,000-year-old ancient being?" He muttered in dumb surprise, but what followed next almost made his heart stop beating. Epic quest activated. Host has come across a being with an energy wave equaling a wild world sun. An ancient Nihil. Mission: defeat a Nihil. Rewards: 1. Plus 200 level up cards. 2. Plus 100 million EXP. 3. A class upgrade card. 4. A title. 5. The least of 2 new Nihil skills assimilation. 6. Plus 1 life rejuvenation card that automatically activates upon death. Mission difficulty: impossible. RYUK? RYUK? The loud call felt like a distant dream, as his eyes remained imprinted upon the tab. When he felt the shake, only then was he able to snap his gaze away from the system panel to look at the masked Orlith. "You zoned out again? Are you okay?" she asked, as Ryuk silently turned away from her to the edge of the bay. His eyes once more looked through the boldened quest, especially at the last words. Mission difficulty: impossible. Hey system. Yes. How strong, stat-wise, is a being whose energy wave can be comparable to that of the sun? He asked, amidst a rapidly beating heart, and the panel flashed. A being who could stand on top of a wild world sun and remain unharmed must have at least a full 100,000 stat points in all attributes. Worthy of nothing is that the host only has 10,000. The system added, as Ryuk's eyebrows creased. "If I activate the Beyonder Dragon skill, I will have 50,000, he replied, as his eyes gleamed with a familiar yet distant light. Once more it was activated Ryuk's childhood greed. It was something that made him pause a bit on his feet, his memories drifting to the time when he had fought that mutated rat back in Grade E. Even though it was something dangerous for his level, he had stayed and fought, just to obtain the rat's core. Now he felt the same greed, rippling out from his soul once more. But this time he wasn't just fighting a rat. He was to face something that could erase him from existence, turning him to ashes. But the rewards this time weren't some measly star coins. 200 level-up cards with 100 million EXP were something he would kill for. And that was just 2 of what could be obtained if he completed the mission. "Should I take the risk?" he asked one more time. This time, the system didn't reply at all, leaving just Ryuk and the darkness from closing his eyes alone. He tried to steel his heart, but it faltered still. He tried to think of all he would be if he won, but his beating heart reminded him of what would come if he failed. In the end, only one question was in Ryuk's heart. What's there to fear? This is just my second body, not my main. Even if I get killed, however low, there's still a plausibility of automatically waking back in my main body. Besides, Orlith said it's the lord of this realm. If we don't kill it, we'll be stuck here forever. Isn't that also as good as dead? So, what's there to fear? he muttered to himself as his eyes opened. Once more it appeared. A deep coldness that had appeared when he was about to face Zarkul. Deep madness burned from insane conviction, as his shimmering purple eyes suddenly bore the illusion of their depth, having been cracked like snowflakes. The spirit said, "Battle is the quickest way to grow the hurricane energy. Why should I fear it?" he thought, lowering his hands as he silently took a deep inhale. Is he afraid? Orlith muttered to herself when she watched Ryuk pause in shock from her asking if he was ready to face the Nihil. Then he had turned away, and now he has his back to his, as he wordlessly stared at the billowing waves of the sea. Another coward? She thought to herself, the same feeling of disappointment swelling in her heart. Even though he truly was only at the Apocrypha stage, she had felt there was somehow more to him. How he had stepped into an unknown gate without thinking. How he had survived the attack of the Kraken. Something in her soul told her he was one of those rare few anomalies of men. But now, seems like he's just an ordinary Apocrypha kid after all, she muttered as she turned her back away, stepping forward and leaving the bay when it descended. A stifling aura made her next step hang an inch from touching the ground, and she halted in place. Somehow, the world seemed to have turned colder and all of a sudden heavier. It was an aura that made her feel she had turned her back against a beast, and she immediately turned backwards to find him facing her. His hair was flying all around his head, his purple tattoos diffusing into the surrounding space and causing his clothes to flay all around him. I've almost forgotten this feeling I've always had. This feeling of walking through the line of danger, knowing well, one mishap and life might end. How long has it been since I've felt this feeling? He thought, as he finally stood before Orlith, who turned to face him. I am ready, he replied cryptically, as Orlith paused for a few seconds, and then a sickening grin crawled onto her face, one obstructed from Ryuk through her mask. She asked just one question. What weapon do you use? She asked, a question that confused Ryuk, but he still replied, almost unconsciously. A scythe. Orlith stretched forth her hand toward him, and he watched as the slit appeared, and from within, a worm came out, holding in its jaw something that surprised Ryuk. It was a weapon far from simple. A 3-meter-long scythe, with a bizarre color of white, etched in crimson red and black runes. You'll need a divine-grade weapon if you wish to face a divine-grade being, she said, as Ryuk paused his gaze on the weapon. He felt no reason to refuse as he grabbed the weapon in his hands, only for his eyes to widen as veins instantly formed all over his hands. Heavy! The scythe was shockingly heavy, boring down on Ryuk as if he were holding onto a mountain. Also Ryuk, Orlith said, as Ryuk watched her stance, which remained compressed like a bow ready to be unleashed, her body leaning toward the distant mountains. This may very well be our last fight, so enjoy every second of it while it lasts. The second she said that, the air flapped violently as the entire ship tilted 50 meters backward from the resultant force. Like a rocket bomb, Orlith shot forward with incredible speed, becoming a beam of light that quickly faded away from view. Her bravery is admirable, the system said, as Ryuk looked at the disappearing figure. She had just mentioned that this could very well be their last fight before death, and yet she had rushed forward as if she had no idea what the danger was. Such bravery, which could, to any normal person, be very well termed as pure insanity, was truly admirable. He turned away from her and back to the scythe held in his hands. Activate Beyonder Dragon, Ryuk ordered, and a moment later, the 6 shards slipped out from the void of space, coming to arrange themselves around his head. From within his skin, white scales began to slip out, his shimmering purple hurricane runes aligning themselves. Ryuk felt the boost instantly, a 5x increase in his physical stats, which made the bulging veins of his arms recede as he felt the scythe become light. He passed it into his right hand, revolving it around him and slicing open many black holes before it eventually landed in his hand again. Swinging backwards, Ryuk crouched to the ground, facing the direction of the island, and then, kaboom! The ship was sent another 50 meters backward as he burst forth from its bay, rapidly moving through the air. Soon enough, he was in the sky above the island, still piercing forward, and he didn't need to be told where, because he heard the sound of heartbeats, coming from within the largest sky-piercing mountains present on the island. Heaving his scythe backward, veins squirmed out of his right hand as his feet slammed into space, crushing it like glass before. It wasn't a simple slash. In less than half a second, Ryuk had sent 3 space-rupturing scythe strikes filled with every single bit of his physical power, ripping toward the mountain. The resultant force was enough to send he himself jerking backwards in the process, slamming into one of the mountains and blowing it to bits. The phantom of 3 purple-colored scythe beams was all that was left behind after his disappearance, rapidly making their way toward the mountain with seemingly unparalleled sharpness and power. Yet, mere meters before the scythes touched the mountain, everything came to a screeching stop. The air refused to move. The black holes around the scythe beams halted in their billow, and even the beams themselves paused mid-step. The sound of footsteps echoed out, and the entire realm quivered with every single step. An opening appeared from within the mountain, and the first thing to emerge was a claw of abyssal darkness that slashed forward toward the 3 scythe beams. It was in the motion of one who wanted to chase away an annoying fly, but what came from that simple, harmless-looking swat was a 10-meter-long phantom of pitch-black, devilish claw. They easily cleaved through the hanging scythe beam attacks like a knife through butter, continuing into the distance. Even though the sound of those steps came from about a kilometer away, Ryuk felt it. It was like someone was stepping directly onto his naked heart, resulting in its sinking deep within his ribcage. When he burst out from the remnants of the destroyed mountain he had collapsed in, he found it just a meter away, a 10-meter devilish black claw oozing with abyssal energy, and was more than thrice his entire height. The aura. A roar left Ryuk's lips as his fingers tightened madly against the edge of the scythe. Flashing forth toward the claw, his clothes were turned to ashes from the sudden friction, the scythe cleaving toward the claw. Kaboom! An explosion burst forward, drowning him in a tempest, and following that explosion was the sharp sound of something cracking to pieces. Veins squirmed like snakes along his arms, his teeth clenched in maddened fury. The floor beneath him was dragged to pieces as Ryuk was sent skidding backward from the power, amidst the sound of his arm bones cracking into pieces as it resisted the billowing claw attack. Heavy! It's terrifyingly heavy! He roared in his head, when the claw suddenly vanished, becoming ethereal as if it had never been there. It bypassed Ryuk's resistance, but the moment it passed through the scythe, it turned real again, flashing through him and slamming into the ground behind. Dust filled the air, but just 5 seconds later, it cleared, and the result was revealed. The ground where the claw had landed had a total of 5 marks, whose ends were unknown, almost like an abyss. And as for Ryuk, who stood before this abyss, still in the motion of resisting against his scythe, his eyes, which were wide open from resistance, had the light in them dim, and a moment later, blood burst out from both sides of his shoulders and all over his torso. His knees gave way instantly, slamming onto the ground, followed by his entire body. One move, one claw, and Ryuk collapsed onto the ground, slowly bathed by his own pool of blood. 4500 endurance. The system panel flashed before Ryuk's gaze, whose entire body quivered like one who had voltage after voltage of electricity being passed through him. But that was nothing compared to the overwhelming pain Ryuk felt. For one, it was as if his sense of pain had been magnified by thousands upon thousands of times, sending forth the impulse of the claw still raking through his body even long after it had already ended. He remained paralyzed on the ground, mouth wide to take in air, even as ceaseless explosions rang out through the background. When he finally felt himself get a mouthful of air, his fingers clenched tighter against the scythe and forcefully rose himself onto one knee amidst the self-unraveling pain. He raised his head, and his irises widened to their limit when he saw what stood just a hand's reach away from him, piercing gaze boring down onto his figure. When Ryuk had thought of what a Nihil was, he had imagined an ancient existence. The legend he had heard was that the Nihils were an ancient evil race who fought another race, and together all destroyed themselves. In his mind, he had already conjured an image of what they could be, or what one who was 1,000 years old might look like. A gigantic monster, towering countless meters tall and covered in spikes and thorns. In short, he had expected something monstrous. But what stood before him? She was no monstrous figure. It was a woman with purple skin, standing about 3 meters in height. She was dressed in what seemed like a dark, ancient armor, with purple sleeves underneath, and her eyes were like his, brilliantly shimmering purple. On her head, she wore a crown adorned with sharp, jagged spikes, exuding an aura of power and menace. It was intricately designed, with a mix of black and purple accents, partially obscuring the upper part of her face. Black hair cascaded down her figure, and a single ornate, star-shaped earring gleamed on her ear. But what surprised Ryuk was that right now, she was holding something high in the air, by the head. It was a figure in glimmering golden armor, none other than Orlith. But right now, both her hands were hanging limp by her sides, her armor littered with cracks and holes. She was held by her head, her feet dangling in the air, and Ryuk was beyond lost for words. Orlith had been defeated, and it had yet to even be a full minute since the fight began. Run, Ryuk, run. She's far beyond both your levels. The system notification flashed as Ryuk's teeth ground together in defiance, and a second later, he moved. Appearing before the lady, his scythe swung back as he cleaved forward with speed. She slowly stretched out her second claw, inching toward the path of the approaching scythe. Yet before it made contact, "Halt!" Ryuk roared out the command as her approaching claw suddenly froze in the air, a gleam crossing her eyes. Ryuk screamed insanely, and the trajectory of his scythe changed, slicing toward her necks. One move. He simply needed one move, and he could kill her. Oh! A faint gasp escaped the woman's lips as her eyes locked onto the scythe that flashed toward her neck with terrifying speed. While things seemed to be happening with incredible speed, the world had already come to a crawl before her eyes. A law that can hold me back? That's rare, she muttered, and just as the scythe could slice through her neck, it suddenly recoiled in, bending her head downward. Ryuk's eyes widened in shock when he watched his scythe land exactly into her mouth. And then, cracks snaked along the scythe, as the lady clenched her jagged teeth against it. The scythe was fully shattered into pieces, and a terrifying reverberation flowed into Ryuk's arm, slashing open a cut on his palm that revealed his white bones. She shattered a divine-grade weapon. With her teeth? The system panel flashed in disbelief, but Ryuk didn't pause. Taking single step backward as his hands jerked back and his body lay horizontally in the air. And then, boom! A fist tore through the world with power, slamming forward with unparalleled ferocity. It smashed right into the lady's face, whose expression turned into a surprised grin. Boom! Shockwaves exploded behind her as she was flung into the distance, slamming violently into the far-off mountains. Ryuk landed on the ground, ready to shoot forward and follow up, but his body froze in place. Immediately, he turned behind him quickly, crossing both arms over his chest. A claw brimming with dark aura appeared in the space behind Ryuk, materializing before his chest in less than a split second. What the hell? Kaboom! The claw smashed straight into his crossed arms. The sound of skin being ripped rang out, followed by bones being crushed as Ryuk was immediately sent flying. His body tumbled through mountains, each failing to hold him and being blasted to rocks, before slamming into a gigantic one and becoming lodged deep in its core. -2000 endurance. Tisich, go away. Ryuk snapped at the system panel. His hand reached outward to grip the edge of the mountain, but his wrist had been turned to mush, all his fingers twisted at different angles. The purple tattoo on his hand lit up, and his fingers immediately began rearranging themselves. Once more, they straightened, and his hands gripped the edge of the mountain wall, dragging himself out. When he stepped out, the sound of footsteps echoed out as Ryuk looked straight ahead, and there she was, walking toward him once more. In her left hand, the limp body of Orlith. With one step, she was 2 kilometers away. With her second step, she was 1,000 meters away, and with the third 50 meters away, and with her last step, kaboom! A claw smashed directly into the spot where Ryuk's face had just been. The entire mountain blasted into dust. Her grin widened as she looked to her left, in time to see a purplish tattoo leg rapidly magnify toward her face. Her spine bent, yanking her downward as the leg flashed by just an inch from her nose. Yet, it suddenly halted in place and then slammed downward toward her face. Boom! A 10-meter crater blasted into the mountainous floor as Ryuk's foot slammed downward. She dodged it? He thought in shock. And then he turned his head upward, and there it was. Space was being ripped into nothing as her leg also blasted toward his head. It was so fast, it was upon him before a blink. Halt! Ryuk commanded. The leg froze in place. Immediately, his hands clenched into fists as he lunged forward toward her, punching once more. But all of this only happened in his head, as Ryuk felt a heavy force slam directly onto his head from above. He was violently blasted into the ground, disappearing into the carved-open abyss. 5,500 endurance. Remaining endurance. 0. Host has run out of endurance. This has to be a joke. Beyonder Dragon deactivated. TCH. The weakness came. It was sudden, a deep weakness that paralyzed every bone in his body. And also alien. How long had it been since he was crippled from a fight, unable to move? But even then, he was deeply confused. How? How was I defeated so quickly? All I received were 3 physical strikes. There were no special techniques or skills activated. Yet a woman had defeated him. Boom! The earth beneath him quivered as Ryuk's hands gripped the ground. The sound of footsteps came closer and closer as he forcefully pushed himself up into a crouch. When he rose fully, she was once more before him, beholding that same wild grin. "You have a firmer will than her," she said as she brought up her left arm, heaving the dangling Orlith. "But you're still too weak, but also too young," she said, her left claw rising to her chin as she rubbed it, eyes watching Ryuk with a thoughtful look. "You have as much power as her, but she's lived for 300 years or so, while you seem not to have even reached 20. That's a sign of good potential. You might just be worth keeping alive," she added with a rebellious grin, just as the claw holding Orlith began to tighten. Golden blood began pouring down, the sound of cracking resounding. Orlith's eyes slowly flew open from the pain of her skull slowly being pierced, sharp claws digging for her brain. But it all suddenly paused when the words echoed out. "Let her go." "Oh," the Nihil woman smirked faintly. She looked at Ryuk, whose every pore dripped with blood, and an amused grin curled on her lips. "That's a poor way to beg for your lover's life, isn't it?" she asked, as she resumed digging her claws deeper. As the young man slowly raised his head, his purple eyes locked into hers. For someone just defeated, you'd expect some mix of disbelief, anger, or pain. But when she looked into his eyes, she paused. "Begging for her life?" Ryuk repeated, and a moment later, the air flapped as he flashed forward, his left hand inching toward her stomach, only to be grabbed by her claw. At the moment both her claw and his hands met, Ryuk's purple tattoo began changing. From a bright purple glow, it rapidly darkened into a pitch-black glow. A serious, focused grin stretched across Ryuk's face. "I'm ordering you," he said, but the voice that came wasn't just his. It was the roar of an ancient monster, and quickly enough, she witnessed the transformation. His smaller form rapidly expanded into something monstrous. From his 2.5-meter height, he shifted into a 7-meter-tall humanoid beast that came to tower above her. For gigantic horns protruded from the sides of his head as crimson-red scales rapidly armored his entire body. From his spine, a massive tail burst outward, slamming into the ground and hurling open a deep abyss. He raised his head, his gaze burning red, locking eyes with her purple ones, and silently his other claw slashed. "Law of destruction, terminal execution," he called out, and then, it was no ordinary claw slash. The Nihil woman immediately noticed. Every inch of space where that claw passed started to vanish rapidly. Space wasn't just cracking from the slash. It was erasing as if it had never existed at all. That's the law of erasure, she thought in surprise. She immediately dropped Orlith and slashed forward at Ryuk's incoming attack. But just as both claws were about to collide, Ryuk's claw changed its trajectory by just an inch. It slammed straight into the side of her abdomen, covered by dark armor. A groan of pain, unable to be held back, echoed in Ryuk's ear as he watched her body jerk backward from the force. And then, boom! She was blasted back like a cannonball, fading into the distance amidst a spray of pitch-black blood trailing her path. Orlith's body was about to collapse to the ground with a thump when it landed instead on Ryuk's gigantic red tail, which wrapped around her, drawing her in close to him. One of her eyes cracked open as she mumbled, "Run! Leave me and run!" she called out. But Ryuk's claw moved to the side, and he ripped open the space, whilst giving the command, "Activate Void Rift." The second he spoke, a dark vortex materialized where the claw slash had struck, and Ryuk, in an instant, stepped into it, disappearing with the body of Orlith. The rift closed, and just a moment after, she reappeared, flickering purple eyes burning with intense bloodlust. She looked at the surrounding space, eyes finally locking onto where the rift had been opened. "I know that form. He's a null," she said, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of intense bloodlust and bizarre joy. A null holding the faint aura of carnage. Only one null in existence bears the aura of carnage. When Ryuk stepped into the familiar void of the rift, once again the sound of chains echoed, and in an instant he was bound. Though he managed to shield Orlith, wrapping her safely in his tail, which was far away and wasn't caught in the chain. He looked forward and saw a dark elf stepping toward him. Surprise flickered across the elf's face as he saw the monster and the lady. That person was none other than the assassin Ryuk had captured during his first main quest. "Take off the chains, or I'll take them off myself." That was the first thing the monster said, and the heaviness of it chilled to the bone. Something in his heart told him only horror would await him if he dared refuse, causing him to release the chains. In the blink of an eye, Ryuk took a single step, appearing upon a floating platform where he laid down Orlith's battered body. A second later, his null transformation began to recede, resulting in him dropping to his knees, blood gushing out of every orifice. All of this, Owen watched from the side, his face covered in disbelief. He had been given a simple mission, one that he had thought couldn't be any simpler. 2 Apocrypha stage cultivators and 3 Eternity stage cultivators, all going on a hunt for a little princess who was merely at the Cataclysm stage. Their mission was to kill her. And yet, in this mission, all 5 had met their demise, save for him alone, who had ended up getting trapped in this endless, dark void. Endless because he had tried to look for a way out and failed. It had always amazed him, and half left him in disbelief, that he had been beaten and trapped within the realm of someone who seemed so much younger than he was. Yet, he seemed so powerful that it was beyond Owen's imagination. But now, that same one whom he thought was so powerful, he was on all fours hacking up pitch-dark blood mixed with white. His left hand gripped onto his chest, where, from the side, Owen could see some gigantic claw marks, oozing with a dark aura. The young man who had been his captor now looked like someone just a step away from certain death. It was a notion that filled Owen with disbelief. What horror could have reduced him to this state? But a darker realization crawled up to him. So even someone as strong as him can also be reduced to such a state, huh? She still got me, Ryuk cursed, crimson veins pulsing in his eyes. At the last second, he had pulled off the impossible. He had copied her abyssal energy and forcefully triggered his null transformation skill. He even used one of the nullic skills, Claws of Erasure, Terminal Execution. And it had all happened so fast that he managed to land a clean strike on her. Yet, before she could be sent flying, she had reacted just as fast, smashing her claw into Ryuk's chest. And the pain from that was far worse. "Hey, system," he forced out from his lips. And immediately, an object appeared in the space before him. It was a vial with golden liquid bubbling here and there inside. It floated before Ryuk, whose hand reached for it. But something snatched the vial faster than he could. A hand that took it away from him. And in return, a dark blade flashed across Ryuk's vision. White blood sprayed into the air as his head jerked back from the force, and he landed flat onto his back on the platform, his vision turning blurry. "You've sustained 2 major injuries while holding 0 endurance stats. You're now dying." The system panel flashed before his gaze, disbelief washing over him. Running across the top of his head was a blade mark so deep his white skull was revealed. One of his eyes had gone blind from the blood that flooded it, but with the other he looked and saw him standing there. The assassin he had kept locked away in here stood right before him. One hand held the scythe, currently resting on Ryuk's neck, and the other held the healing vial. Owen turned away from the vial in his hand before crouching and looking down at Ryuk. "Do you know why you're dying?" he asked, as his curved blade inched closer to Ryuk's neck, pressing against the skin. White blood began slowly oozing out. "If you kill me, you'll be stuck here forever," Ryuk forced out, incoherently, as the chilling pain slowly spread through his head. The blade was cutting deeper and deeper into his neck. Owen leaned closer, his expression focused for a few seconds. Yet when he looked into Ryuk's dying eyes, a grin curved his lips, one filled with disbelief and mockery. "You know, I still remember what you always were," Owen began slowly, his eyes flashing with memories. "That overly confident aura of yours mixed with seeming naivety, though sweet at first, still couldn't hide that one factor about you. It's like a disgusting stench that hangs around you all the time," Owen said, watching a line of blood slip from Ryuk's mouth. "It's your nauseating ego. The ego that screams, 'I can never be defeated.'" He completed, and Ryuk's iris widened. "Because of your ego, you placed me, an assassin, in here, for whatever reason you may initially have. But because you think you're invincible and can't possibly be defeated by the likes of me, you didn't do whatever it was you planned to do with me. If I ever crossed your mind, you were probably like, 'Him? Yeah, he can't do anything. It's fine,'" Owen said, chuckling darkly. "Yet," he continued, pulling his blade back and hanging it before Ryuk's eye. And then, the blade carved straight into Ryuk's right eye, cleaving it to bits as white blood slowly leaked out. The pain of losing an eye was so overwhelming that Ryuk could not hold down the urge to scream. But all he could do was gargle on the blood flooding his lungs. "Yet look at you now. Even more pathetic than I was when you caught me," Owen said as he roughly pulled out the blade from Ryuk's eyes, making the blood rain down his face. "You thought the tables could never be turned on you, didn't you?" Owen said, as Ryuk's eye turned away from him and looked up into the sky. But there were no beautiful blue clouds to welcome his gaze. Only the deep, dark void, which seemed even more haunting than an abyss. "I died," he thought, the realization slowly dawning. "And I didn't die in battle with someone countless times stronger than I am, but at the hands of one I truly thought was no threat. In the end, I died at the hands of someone so weaker than I am." This was the most disbelieving thing he had ever faced in his entire existence. The reality that there was someone so strong they could render him half dead in just 3 strikes was hard enough to believe. Yet just moments after, he had faced another shock. He was dying in a way he could have never predicted, not even in a million years of imagining how his death would come. Owen's eyes flashed when he saw the blood in Ryuk's mouth slowly bubbling. His disbelieving expression twisted into clear laughter, which could be seen amidst the blood on his face. "He's laughing," Owen thought in shock, and his expression grew even more confused when he saw the white blood spilling from Ryuk's remaining eye. His expression was like that of someone who finally had his freedom after hundreds of years of being denied it, yet tears of blood flowed freely down. Still, Owen didn't waste a moment. "Open the gate and maybe, just maybe, I might give you back your precious vial." The vial dangled right before Ryuk's drooping eyes, as the blood in his throat gurgled even more. "Come on, kid. Open the door. Don't tell me you want to die so badly in my hands, do you?" Owen said with an evil giggle, before turning to the side, looking at the unconscious body of Orlith. "Or, do you want me to slowly carve her apart, piece by piece, while you watch?" he sneered. "She must be important if you brought her here, right?" Ryuk's fingers twitched twice. His eyeball slowly rolled in its socket, turning to Owen. "You," he said, his lips moving, but the gurgle of blood down in his throat was louder. "Huh!" Owen raised an eyebrow, leaning his ear closer to Ryuk's lips. Now he could hear it more clearly. "You're weak and pathetic, just like I've always thought." A sentence enough to cause a vein of rage to pop out on Owen's head. But the vein cooled down as he whispered back. "Your ego is still so strong, even when your life is basically within my grasp," Owen said, half in disbelief while chuckling darkly. "Keeping up character even in death, huh?" But he replied with another whisper. "You don't have my life in your grasp," Ryuk said, and Owen caught on to something abnormal. The air in his arms was standing on edge. "In fact, it's the other way around," Ryuk continued, his eyeballs turning away from him to look behind him instead. Immediately, Owen turned back, reflexively slashing his blade toward his rear. Yet, the sound of weapons clashing resounded, and Owen's eyes widened in shock. Veins bulged on his arms as he crazily resisted the strike of a glitching blue katana that came from within a white vortex. But the resistance only lasted so long before the katana phased through him, and then the sound of flesh being ripped through rang out as a hand was sent flying into the air, amidst raining dark blood. "Arg!" A groan of pain followed as he was instantly sent flying from the powerful strike, slamming into a floating platform in the void and becoming lodged within. The severed hand slowly floated down, and another hand grabbed it. A feminine hand, covered in advanced scales of nanotech plating. It belonged to a slim lady clad completely in this technoplate. Her fingers reached for the vial still clutched in the severed hand. She took it, threw the limb away, and lowered to both knees. One of her hands slipped behind Ryuk's neck, raising his head as she uncorked the vial and poured the contents down his blood-filled throat. "No! No!" The scream that rang out from the distance bordered between insanity and horror. Owen tore himself out of the platform he had been lodged in, only to find a scene that made his heart drop. The golden drops of liquid floated down from the vial and into Ryuk's throat. "Stop!" he screamed in rage, rushing forward at high speed. But someone blocked his way. A tall blue being, clad in blue armor and wielding a gigantic katana. "Go away!" Owen screamed in anger, abyssal energy raging out from his dual sickle blades. Angrily, he cleaved his sickle-like blades forward, slashing open the void of space like it was paper. In response, a grimoire appeared in the hands of his opponent, the pages fluttering open. Then his katana jerked to the side. Techno Obliver Art. Digital Rend. Immediately, the katana flashed forward with terrifying speed toward the dark sickle blades. The arc of the blade left behind a rupture, a searing code that tore digital threads into the air as both techno energy and abyssal energy clashed. A massive rupture formed between reality, the rift in the void shimmering insanely from the power. Both the blades refused to back down, giving a chance for something else to join in. It was a gigantic hammer, lighting up with a brilliant blue light. It slammed forward with horrifying speed toward Owen, who rushly crossed his blades over himself. A circular shockwave, expanding for nearly a kilometer, exploded, causing Owen to be blasted backward at high velocity. Boom! 2 platforms along his path were blown to dust before he smashed into the third, once more carving out a massive crater. TCH. He clicked his tongue in disgust as his teeth clenched tightly, dark veins squirming over his face from anger. But when he stepped out and looked into the distance, his heart sank further. All around Ryuk were strange beings, all clad in technoplates, blue energy surrounding them. They emerged from the white vortex behind them and gathered together. A total of 10 of them, radiating energy that made Owen's hair stand on end. But most terrifying was the one who stood before the group. The blue technoplated figure, holding a grimoire in one hand and a katana in the other. How did they come in? Where do they come from? Who are they? The questions came flooding into his mind, but before he could find an answer, a ripple of energy spread out, carrying a wave of power that made him freeze in place. Not because of spatial lock, but because of the aura, filled with insane bloodlust and madness. His body trembled as he looked around in shock, gaze slowly drifting, and there he saw him, floating off the platform, surrounded by pulsing purple energy. Ryuk rose. He landed softly on his feet. Ah! White putrid gas came bubbling out from his lips, his white hair flapping with monstrous intensity. Slowly, his gaze rose, turning straight to Owen. Those shimmering purple eyes, normally dreamy to behold, now held a different intensity. He had healed his eye, which he had been blinded in, now shimmering with returned power and bloodlust. And now, his aura had grown even more monstrous than Owen remembered. He took one more step backwards and instantly turned to flee. But he never took a second step, as standing there behind him, just a few inches away, was Ryuk.